Upgrade-related security considerations. In this nugget, we look at security as it relates not to a fresh or new installation of MySQL Server, but to an upgrade. After all, not every DBA is of the bent. Once I install a version of MySQL, that is the version I'm going to stick with forever and a day. Amen. It's not always like that. As we're going to learn in this nugget, MySQL development, both the core MySQL team as well as community members and third-party folks, are constantly doing bug fixes and feature enhancements that may make upgrade a part of your regular release cycle. Therefore, it's important for us to consider some of these security-related implications. First, we're going to look at upgrading the grant tables. We know what the grant tables are now, so we'll look at some specifics with that. We're also going to take a look at SQL or SQL mode values that pertain to security. Now, one thing that this nugget is not is an end-to-end treatment of the upgrade process and an end-to-end treatment of SQL mode. I cover both of those topics in our CMA and DBA1 CBT Nuggets products. But, as promised, I'm going to always give you a brief nutshell summary of the relevant subject matter for those of you who do not have those products. Let's get going. Alright, so upgrade-related security considerations for MySQL Server. What are those considerations? Well, the bottom line is, as previously stated, the MySQL development team, like any software development shop, is constantly tinkering with the development tree and doing bug fixes, correcting code, and ideally, gradually adding new features and functionality, fixing and extending current features, and, as I said, hopefully developing brand new functionality. So, specifically in our context now with IT security, you may find that as a new MySQL version comes in, and the way versions work is you have the major version and a minor version. For instance, MySQL 5.1, the major version is going to be the 5, the minor version is going to be the .1. Now, when you add some fairly benign, well, I shouldn't even say fairly benign, really software development it depends on who you talk to on how strict the rules are in terms of the differentiation between a major and a minor version. You're not likely to see a jump from version 5 to version 6 for a little while now. Really, you're finding go from 5.0 to 5.1, and the current beta as of this recording is actually 5.4. So there's been a kind of a leap from 5.1 to 5.4. So there's been quite a few incremental changes in one version jump. Specifically, to get back to my original train of thought, you may find that in a particular new version of MySQL Server that some security features have been enhanced or added to the product, and these security features may involve new or changed privileges. Now, this is a big deal. I can actually give you an example between MySQL version 5 and version 5.1. And that's the trigger privilege. And if you go into the documentation, which is my second bullet point, in particular, if you visit the MySQL reference manual online or download the version of the reference manual for the current MySQL version you're interested in and look in the upgrade notes, you can take a look at all of the specific new stuff related to security and learn if there are any new changes that you need to be aware of, especially in terms of security privileges. Because, the trigger privilege makes it a lot easier to granularly assign permissions related to, in this case, triggers. In fact, in the upcoming demo, I'm going to give you a walkthrough on how you can easily find that upgrade section of the reference manual. Now, you see my last bullet point here, I mentioned fix. Now that denotes that there's some problem, and there actually is. When you perform an upgrade in MySQL, you have a currently installed version. Let's say you have 5.0 installed, and you perform an upgrade to version 5.1. You think, okay, everything's all ducky. I now have all of my new nifty security features in place. I can now immediately begin using my new privileges, and the changed privileges and all that stuff is immediately activated. Well, guess what, friends? Nope, that's not the case. In my opinion, it's probably done for safety and security reasons that changes that are added to the grant tables, your security database tables in the MySQL database, are not activated by default when you upgrade from one version of MySQL to another. That's an important gotcha that you really need to be aware of. You need to be aware of that for the MySQL certification exam, certainly, but you should be aware of that even more so for your real-life work as MySQL DBAs. Now, the fix, you'll want to back up. This is after you do your upgrade. You'll want to back up your MySQL system database just in case something blows up or goes wrong. You'll be able to restore it. And then you'll run a table upgrade script. Now, depending upon the version of MySQL that you're dealing with, if you've upgraded to 5.0 or 5.1 or later, the specific table upgrade is going to be a little bit different. Now, remember, on the DBA2 exam, you're going to be tested on the 5.0 tools. However, to make this training as relevant as possible for you, I'm also going to give you the 5.1 and later tools, so you'll have some real-life relevancy as well as just the exam relevancy. We'll first take a look at our exam objective, how to upgrade the privilege tables in MySQL 5.0 and earlier. And to do this, you run a shell script called MySQL fix privilege tables. Now, this isn't an extra download. This comes bundled with your MySQL Server software and is therefore available to you as soon as you upgrade to MySQL 5. Now, how you invoke this script is a little different depending upon whether you're on a Nix or a Windows platform. Now, on Nix, you're obviously used to running shell script. You have all sorts of these script interpreters built right into the OS. So from a shell prompt, you would simply invoke directly, as long as this script is in your search path, MySQL fix privilege tables, and then you have some optional flags that you can throw in, including the root user password. And what this will do is, the take-home message really, is that it will upgrade your privilege tables, all of your MySQL grant security tables, to take advantage of any enhancements that were given in the current version, the newly upgraded version of MySQL. Again, that's why you're doing this. You perform your upgrade. You want to make sure that your upgrade reflects all of your new bells and whistles with security. That's why you run this script. Now, on Windows, where it's not assumed that you have access to shell script ability, what MySQL team gives you is just a traditional old-school .SQL script file. Therefore, what you'll want to do is log in as a root user or as a super user into the MySQL client, and we can use our good friend the source command and then just path out to the MySQL fix privilege tables.sql script file and load that bad boy in that way. Now again, best practice, you want to back up your MySQL system database first, obviously, just as I said, in case something goes wrong, you can reload. And again, you run the script after your upgrade to MySQL 5. How does this work with a more recent version of MySQL? In other words, 5.1.7 on forward. Here, the MySQL development team has switched things up. They've created what I'm calling a Swiss Army knife checker utility or table upgrade utility. And this is a shell utility called MySQL_upgrade. It has a simpler name for one thing. It's easier to remember. It's easier to invoke. And what this shell utility does is it does everything that the MySQL fix privilege table script does. And it essentially runs the MySQL check tool, if you're familiar with that. We talk about that in the other CBT nuggets I've done on MySQL. We discuss this in great detail. Nutshell summary is that MySQL check is an external command line tool that is really your full-fledged table maintenance tool. It will do table repair, table optimization, table analysis, you name it. It's a really nifty utility. You should be well aware of it for all of your MySQL exams. Now, this is kind of cool too. As of MySQL 5.1.10, the MySQL team has changed this MySQL upgrade from a shell script that was only available in Nix. Can you believe that? Those darn MySQL folks and their preference for Nix. They finally made it into an executable binary that works with either Unix, Linux, or Windows platforms. So finally, we have a table upgrade tool, a security grant table upgrade tool that works on all platforms with MySQL. Well, what do you think about them apples? Security in SQL mode. Now, your first question, if you're not familiar with SQL mode, is what the heck is it? SQL mode is another example of MySQL Server's flexibility. The bottom line is that MySQL Server can operate in several different SQL modes, and what these modes do is allow the server to perform different levels of data validation for different users. They control query processing and server behavior, and therein lies our purposes in this nugget. The security implication of SQL mode is that we can use or set SQL mode to protect against malicious or willful data input that is meant to break data integrity in our tables, you see. And the bottom line is, as new MySQL versions come out, the MySQL team definitely does either change or introduce brand new SQL modes. Bottom line is, SQL mode is cool because we can set SQL mode to handle, say, missing data going into our tables, invalid data, out of bounds data, and so on. We can control really that continuum where you have really strict control over data validation, or on the other side, more relaxed or more permissive. You can kind of set the SQL mode where you want it to be on that continuum, depending upon whether you're on a dev environment or prod environment, and depending upon the data that's being stored in the particular table. Now, SQL mode is set at the server level. You could set it globally. You can also set SQL mode at the session level. So if you've got a really strict global SQL mode, you can temporarily override in your session if you need to do that, if you need to relax SQL security to accomplish some specific task. You could also work in the opposite direction. Although you can set SQL mode interactively at the command line in the MySQL client, you can also, at server startup, launch MySQLD with an SQL mode directive. Generally speaking, it's best to use the option file to set SQL mode globally, just to set your server level default, and then have your developers change their session level modes as they need to for their business needs. In our demonstration, we're going to look at some upgrade-related security considerations. We're going to run that MySQL upgrade tool that I told you about. I'm also going to take you to the website, the mysql.com website, so we can take a look at the reference manual and their upgrade-related notes so you know where to find that. Then we're going to take a look at SQL mode. I'm just going to give you a very brief tutorial for those of you who may be rusty on the subject on where to find those options online to read up on them, and then where to set SQL mode in the option file, and then interactively in the MySQL client tool. Here we are on LinNugget 1, our Ubuntu Linux machine, and in this demo we're going to look at upgrade-related security considerations and SQL mode. To begin with, as promised, I wanted to fire open a web browser and take you to the MySQL 5.1 reference manual. Now, how did I come to this website? It's actually very easy. If you perform a Google search for MySQL reference manual, I find that almost always the very first search result is a direct link to this page. And although you can download the reference manual from the MySQL documentation website, there's a link right there. I'm pointing to it. I would formally recommend that as long as you have an active connection to the internet, that you use the online reference manual as much as possible because A, you're seeing essentially a live version of the document that will reflect any changes that the development team makes to the text itself. And number two, these articles have comments from community members that are not reflected in the downloaded text. All right, so in the reference manual, we can look in our section navigation, and in section 2 here, we have installing and upgrading MySQL. And we have installation guidance, and then in section 2.4, upgrading or downgrading MySQL. and then upgrading MySQL. An interesting note you might want to read, downgrading MySQL. If you've performed an upgrade, realized it's not for you for whatever reason, maybe your line of business applications are broken, heaven forbid, you have instructions here from the MySQL development team on rolling back your installation. Alright, so we're in upgrading MySQL, and so here it is, really. This is your page that you want to read. And a little bit down the page here, there's an important link. It says, please read all the notes in Upgrading From. And this is going to be a similar link no matter which version of the reference manual you read, whether it's the MySQL 5.0 reference manual, the MySQL 5.4 reference manual. There's going to be a section that details specifically notes for upgrading from the previous version to this one. It says, these notes enable you to identify upgrade issues that apply to your current MySQL installation. Some incompatibilities discussed in that section require your attention before upgrading. And you'll notice that the documentation team will almost always assume that you're performing an upgrade from the previous version to the current version. So you've got a little bit more work to do perhaps if you're upgrading from MySQL 4 to MySQL 5.1, so consider that. So here are the specific notes, upgrading from MySQL 5 to 5.1, and it goes through. There's quite a few notes, quite a few links, and then finally we get down to the bottom. Not all of the articles contain user comments, but you'll note at least there's a space here where community members can add their own input if they want to. So much for that. Next thing I'll do is open up a command shell, and I'm going to show you this MySQL upgrade executable. We can call this from the Linux Unix command shell, and I found in my experience the best way to run this is as root. And the reason for that is that MySQL upgrade will write a log file when it finishes, and it will write it to your data dir. And if you run this without being a root user, there's going to be a permission denied error. So I'm just going to use good old sudo MySQL _ upgrade. Actually, before doing that, I'm going to throw in the -- help operator just so we can get a command syntax run here. Okay, so it tells us this is MySQL upgrade is the utility for upgrading databases to the new MySQL version. A lot of different things we can do here. Another thing that I like to do always, just because I'm kind of strict and formal this way, is when I run the application, I like to throw in the -u and the -p. Just same thing that you would do when you're running MySQL admin or the MySQL client utility. You notice that the -u parameter is supported, as is -p. You can even run this tool against a foreign host by using the -h. A lot of these flags, these parameters, are exactly the same as other MySQL tools. So I'm going to up arrow. I'm going to do a sudo MySQL upgrade -u root -p. It's asking me for my, I assume, if memory serves, my MySQL root password. Put that in. Tells us this installation is already upgraded. Use -- force if you still need to run the upgrade. Well, I do, so I'm going to force this to run. And it ran. So let me scroll up to the top of this and see what happened. Okay, the first thing it's doing, it looks for, in the data dir, in the default location, it looks for all the system defaults, by the way. It's looking for your option file in etc mysql my.cnf. And then once it gets your base dir and your data dir, it finds your MySQL system database, which it did. Then it looks for your MySQL check executable, runs that utility, and then you'll notice it starts running against all of your tables. First it parses through your MySQL tables, then it finds my Sakila, and then it finds my world. That's all I have on this server, are the Sakila and world sample databases. And then it ran through the steps in MySQL fixed privilege tables, came back okay, so we're good to go. Now if we want to look at that status file, I'm going to cd into var lib mysql, we'll ls, and there's a plain text file called MySQL upgrade info. I'm going to sudo pico mysql upgrade underscore info. Be prepared to be underwhelmed. There's really nothing in this log file except the current version of MySQL, which in this case is 5.1.31. So that's all there is to the MySQL upgrade tool, and that's a good thing because we want to see just nothing but OKs, and we want to see an end status of OK. We don't want to see any errors, right? That's just the bottom line. Let's complete this nugget by taking a look at SQL mode now. Again, we'll visit mysql.com. In their developer zone in the MySQL 5.1 reference manual, I found this article entitled Server SQL Modes simply by using the site search, the search manual, underneath their documentation library submenu. This is a really great article. It's worth your while to print out or at least spend time studying or bookmarking. And what this does is not only describe what SQL modes are, but most importantly, it goes through a list of what those modes are. For instance, it says the most important SQL mode values are probably these. There's an ANSI one. As you probably know, the structured query language is fundamentally tended by ANSI ISO, the American National Standards Institute, the International Organization for Standardization. And if you want your MySQL server to behave as strictly as possible in accordance with ANSI ISO SQL, you can set the ANSI SQL mode. You've got strict trans tables, which says if a value could not be inserted as given into a transactional table, in other words, if you're using InnoDB, abort the statement. Traditional, make MySQL behave like a traditional SQL database system. A simple description of this mode is give an error instead of a warning. So that's pretty strict. Again, if you insert or try to insert invalid or out of bounds data, don't give a warning, just give an error. Simple as that. Now, some of these modes are composite. In other words, you'll find that traditional is actually a mode that includes a bunch of other modes with it. And you're going to see how that works in just a minute. ANSI quotes, there's a lot of these modes that you can add. Anyway, we won't spend any more of your time going through those. Let's just take a look at where the rubber meets the road and how you can actually use these modes. You see, I've logged into MySQL as root now, and we can quickly see what mode is active on the system now server-wide by running show variables. And if I come up to SQL mode, we see blank. So we can rest assured that in the option file, there's nothing set for SQL mode. Now, you'll recall that there's the global mode that comes from the server and the session mode that's active just within my current session that you see on your screen right now. Now, there are a couple variables that we can select against to obtain that data also. We can select at global.sql _ and we can also select at session.sql _ Same thing. Now, if we wanted to set a session level mode, we could say, or type rather, set SQL _ mode equals traditional. Now, if we select against our session level SQL mode, as I said, the traditional is what's called a composite mode. It gives you a whole bunch of specific mode directives in one bundle. Traditional is what I define as a suitcase SQL mode. Open up the suitcase and you have a whole bunch of stuff in it. It actually gives you the strict trans tables, strict all tables, no zero in date, no zero date, so on. So there's a lot of it'll really strict up your database, which is great because it enhances your security when you think about it. Now, because I've set this at the session level, that means if we quit out and log back in, and then select against session.sql _ mode, we're back to nada, okay? So what we can do to create a global SQL mode is, I think you see where I'm going, we're going to sudo pico and open up our option file in etc mysql my.cnf. We'll simply come on down under MySQLD, find an open area, And here, instead of SQL underscore mode, it's SQL dash mode. And I'll set that to traditional. Control O to write out the file. Control X to leave. We're going to have to bounce the service. We don't do net stop and net start like we do in Windows. Here we do sudo etc init.d mysql restart. Great. So let's log back in, show our variables. Boy, it makes the variables a lot harder to see because now we've set our SQL mode. It throws in a lot of extra text and kind of makes our nice tight little table that we had previously ballooned and really ugly. But I think you get the point. Now that we've set our SQL mode to traditional, we see all those individual SQL mode rules, and there they are. So we've used SQL mode to enhance the security of our system. Upgrade-related security considerations review. In this nugget, we looked at upgrading MySQL from a delta or change perspective, even more so how this impacts our security rules. I gave you what I think is a really helpful tip on ensuring that any new security features or changes to the security set in a newly upgraded MySQL installation will go into effect. And then in the second half of this nugget, we did a little quick nutshell primer on SQL mode, and I explained to you how SQL mode can interact or dovetail with security, because by setting the proper SQL mode, we can protect the integrity of our table data against malicious attack. I hope that this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.